if you want to draft 3 ways, you've the exit gate out of the race, you can leave that open, and then you've got 2 drafting gates along the length of the race. And look, those drafting gates along the length of the race, a couple of key features there. One is they shouldn't be within 5 metres of the entrance of the race. It just gives the sheep enough time to come in and build up momentum to go down the race. Just avoid stalling. The second thing about those gates along the side of the race, they should be about 1.2 metres long.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined in this episode by Teagasc Advisor Egan to discuss designing a sheep handling unit. Now, having good handling facilities can reduce labour. It improves both safety and welfare for the handler and sheep alike, and also encourages timely preventative actions. Edward talks us about a booklet he produced, a guide to designing a sheep handling unit, and we discuss the key aspects of design from considering the sheep's behaviour, to the location, to the size of the unit, as well as some of the key features that can be incorporated within it.
Look, I suppose there's 2 things there. One is, look, when I was going out to sheep farms, look, a very high proportion of them, they had either poor handling units or units that could be improved. And then, look, you're going out to other farms and you're seeing some excellent handling units and you're seeing some excellent ideas. And I suppose the idea then behind the book was to create a reference document that, any sheep farmer, advisor, or any person that's going to be involved in designing a sheep handling unit, that person could use. And look, it was just to take the best ideas that I was seeing on both commercial sheep farms, say colleges, and on research farms, take those best ideas, put them into one reference document that people can use. So look, basically what I was doing was just building on other people's ideas and designs that I was seeing out there, so that other people would benefit from that,
No, but it was a very useful thing to collate them, and as you indicated there, every different yard you're in has some slightly different adaptation and a reason why it's there. It's useful just to give them different options. Maybe while I get you, could you give me maybe a brief outline of what is in that booklet? Look,
the name of the book is The Guide to Designing a Sheep Handling Unit. And look, I suppose just a bit of what's in the book. Look, it's 85 pages in length, all right? And there's about 140 coloured pictures in it. And there are just complete range of different aspects of sheep handling units. What the key features are, what the key design features are, on commercial farms and on research farms and on college farms as well. And look, there's about 26 different diagrams in it as well, just ideas that people can use in designing sheep handling units. And look, I suppose the idea behind that then is, there is no one perfect design. A lot of people think, look, there's one perfect design that everybody can use. And it's like someone building a house for themselves. People have different preferences, they have different budgets, they've got different demands on them. And they just can look at that guide and they can pick out the things that are going to suit them, that's going to fit their system, that's going to fit their budget. And that was the reason behind that book.
We also have to be conscious too, a lot of this will have to adapt to other features in the yard as well. So they can kind of pick and choose what bits will work for them.
Look, absolutely. Look, when you're looking at it, what you're going to be looking at there is, the first thing I would look at is location. And the location is going to depend on where's the farm yard located in relation to the main grazing area. And the other thing then is how fragmented is the farm. They're the sort of things that you have to take into account. Flock size, age of the farmer, breed of the sheep, that sort of thing,
It's all going to have an impact on it. Look, let's just go back to the basics. And this is something that comes up quite a bit in different aspects of what we talk about in this podcast. It seems quite basic, this, but Edward, like the benefits of a well-designed sheep handling unit, like that can have a massive impact on your management within a flock.
Look, it does, and sometimes I think we possibly just look at it from a money point of view. Sometimes we try and justify a handling unit just completely on the financials. But like the way I would look at it there is, like, number one, the most important thing to any individual is their health, and having well-designed sheep handling unit is actually good for the handler's health. Because if you look at the type of jobs that you're going to be doing when you're handling sheep, you're going to be trying to hold sheep, restrain them, a lot of repetitive work that involves needles, work that involves handling medication, that sort of thing. A lot of, straining of muscles and things like that. And look, if you have a good handling unit, you take a lot of that drudgery, you take a lot of that risk out of that for the handler, and that improves their health. The second thing then, it does save time. And there was research carried out by Teagasc over 20 years ago. And when they looked at sheep flocks that had good handling facilities, those flocks spent 18% less time, it was nearly 1.3 hours less per yoe per year working with sheep. And, if you break that down to 100 ewes, there's 16 less working days per year. And that time can be spent at other things, whether it's other jobs that has to be done on the farm or other things that are done off farm. Look, the third one there is a big part of sheep farming is preventative, I suppose preventative actions, which is, foot batting or body condition scoring and things like that. And anything that makes your job easier is going to be done, it's going to be done early. And so ease of use encourages use. And that's why having a good handling facility is important. And look, if you want to, prevent lameness in sheep and you've good foot batting facilities, then you're more likely to use them. And the same then if you have to body condition score ewes or dip sheep, those jobs, they're going to be done early before there's a problem, before the pressure comes on, if you've good handling facilities to do that.
It just makes the whole process easier and gets rid of some of that reluctance in tackling jobs when you have a good facility to handle them.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Look, let's get into design a little bit. If we're talking about design, we have to consider what we're working with. Working with the sheep, taking into account their behaviour, what kind of an impact can that have on a well-designed unit?
Look, sheep behaviour actually has a huge impact on designing a sheep handling unit. From the point of view, if you can use the sheep's own behaviour, if you can work with the sheep's behaviour, you can make handling those sheep a lot easier. And for me, look, there are 2 or 3 key things there that you should look at. And number one is vision. And what a sheep can see and what a sheep cannot see, that has a critical impact on ease of handling. And what you're trying to do with sheep is you're trying to draw them into the handling unit, and you're trying to draw them through the handling unit as easy as possible without you having to get having to put a lot of work into it. And so look, if you look at things like what can a sheep see, like what you're trying to do there is you're trying to give the sheep a view of an escape route or a view of an exit. And that's why when you're leaving open sides, you should leave an open side, for example, at an opening of a race and at an exit of a race. So through those gates, if the sheep can see out, even though a gate may be closed, if she can see out, she's more likely to walk up to it. And the same then with the exit of a race. If she can see out, she can see the light, she can see a way of escaping, she's going to take that route and make your life easier. And then when it comes to putting in solid sides where sheep can't see through, look, you want to put those in places where you're trying to close off distractions that are going to cause the sheep to stall. So again, look, you might put closed in, or say solid sides, along the side of a footbath or along the side of a race. And that what you're doing there is you're getting the sheep to focus on the area that you want them to focus on. You're getting them to focus on the area that you want them to move forward in. And then I suppose the third thing, look, sheep, anyone that's handled sheep, they're creatures of habit, and you want to use that behaviour in designing your handling unit. And what I mean by that is, look, take your sheep through a similar route through the sheep handling unit each time you use it. And if you have to take them in a slightly different direction for foot batting or for dipping or for any activities like that, it should only be, the general route through the handling unit should be the same, but there should be a slight variation maybe for completing those tasks. Because what you'll find over time, sheep learn a route through the handling unit, and they understand after a while, if I follow this route through the handling unit, I get to go back to where I want to go. I get to escape. That's what you're trying to work with.
So flow is essential. Getting the sheep to naturally want to travel where you want them to go is the key to it.
Look, it absolutely is, because look, if you have, we can call them stalling points, but if you have places where sheep will stall, so, where will a sheep stall? It'll stall where it sees a distraction, maybe to its left or to its right. It'll stall where there's maybe a sharp turn. It'll stall where it cannot see other sheep ahead of it. If the sheep has to be able to see, she has to be able to see an escape route, or she has to be able to see comrades ahead of her. Those things, they're going to draw her forward to where you want to work with that sheep. And that's what you want to try and work with.
And that takes out some of the work in the unit too. Look, you mentioned location earlier. Let's just tease that one out a bit more with you. When you're deciding on the location of a sheep handling unit, what should we consider? I know sometimes, Edward, in yards we tend to work off a wall or just maybe modify where it was before. There are some limitations to that too, though. So maybe just take me through a little bit about what are the key considerations.
Look, for me, the key consideration, the first thing I'd always do is I would ask, in terms of location, I would ask the client or the farmer, and the farmer should ask themselves the same question: where do I want to locate this handling unit in such a way that it is going to make my life easier, that it's going to be convenient for the handler to use, but also convenient to get the sheep into. And for a lot of farms, that leaves you with two main options. Option one possibly is beside the sheep housing. And if you have a handling unit beside the sheep housing, winter house yolls, it just makes it much easier to bring them out and carry out whatever tasks have to be carried out during the winter with them. So it could be foot batting, vaccination, body condition scoring, scanning, that sort of thing. And the other thing about having it beside the winter housing is, if it's beside the winter housing, the winter housing, those, that housing can act as a collecting pen for holding larger groups of sheep. Even during the summertime, you can bring the sheep in from the grazing area, put them into a sheep shed, hold the bigger batch there, and then take smaller batches through the handling unit. The other location then, is the other possible location is central to the main grazing area. And what you're looking at there is you just want to have to walk the sheep the shortest possible distance to the handling unit. And that makes life easier for the sheep, but it also makes life easier for the handler. The other thing that's important there, in the grazing area is good fencing, good infrastructure around the sheep handling facility. And I suppose the way I would look at it is, your paddocks want to feed into your, maybe into your holding paddock that feeds into your handling unit. The other thing there is, you need safe access for vehicles. You need to site it or locate it to prevent pollution. Okay, that's very important. So keep away from water courses, keep away from areas that are liable to flooding. And then the other thing you're going to need to take into account is, it makes life a lot handier if it's close to water or a tap for filling footbaths or for filling dip tubs or for cleaning down surfaces. And then the other thing is, again, it's if you're close to electricity, obviously for some tasks like shearing or that sort of thing, if you're close to electricity, obviously life is going to be a bit easier.
No, definitely. I think your point here on access into a sheep, we have to be very conscious. We don't want a facility that we have to block up a lot of different areas. We're trying to get animals in and out of on a regular basis. So it has to be fairly straightforward to get in, get out of it and set up.
Absolutely. And look, I suppose the other key point, which is the point you're making there, Kieran, is a handling unit, a fixed handling unit, it should never be in the way. Okay. So if it is, some people will want to site them in the farmyard. Look, site them in the farmyard, but never in the way. The same, some people will want to locate them centrally in the grazing area. Yes, locate them, but never that they're in the way.
Okay. We mentioned collecting yards. Frequently, you can see with flock sizes getting bigger. We've been using old facilities. Oftentimes, the collecting pen can be a limiting factor. What are the couple of things we need to think about when we're designing a collecting pen?
Look, what I'd be thinking about when I'd be collecting, or when I would be designing a collecting pen is, what's the largest batch of sheep or flock of sheep that you're going to be bringing in on a regular basis, okay? And that's what you want to be reflected in your collecting pen. But now, I suppose in saying that, there are other, you could have a holding pen, a paddock maybe half an acre in size that could act as a holding area for larger groups, and then those groups could be taken out and put into a collecting pen. The other thing you could do is you could use surrounding housing or roadways as holding areas for sheep as well. But look, I suppose when it comes to the collecting pen, you want to allow about half a metre squared per lowland yoke without lambs and about 0.65 of a metre squared per lowland yoke with lambs. They're the requirements there. So, but look, you can use adjoining paddocks, sheds, roadways as holding areas for bigger groups.
And look, we have to be conscious, probably a maximum or unshorn, unweaned ewes is going to be the biggest group we've in. Look, your size is going to change, but you still want to be able to accommodate them. I'm just thinking too, Edward, for that collecting pen, it has to be easy to get them into. It's not a place you want to have a stalling point.
Look, it's not. And I suppose just a rough rule of thumb, if you have 100 ewes and if they need 0.65 metres squared each, you're looking at 65 metres squared. And look, if you're going to go for say a collecting pen that's 3 metres wide, then you're going to need a pen obviously that's 22 metres long. Okay, so that's what you need for 100 joules. But look, you want to design the collecting pen in such a way that it is easy to use. And look, what I'd be looking at there is the width of the collecting pen. The ideal width of a collecting pen for one person working on their own, it's somewhere between 3 meters and 4.6 meters. So somewhere between 10 and 15 feet. And the reason I would go for that width of a collecting pen is that one person on their own, driving sheep forward, at those widths, sheep are a lot less likely to be able to retreat or get past the handler working on their own. If you go much wider than that, once you start going over 15 feet and you're on your own there, sheep will find it easier to get around you. And I suppose the other thing there is, look, your entrance gate into the collecting pen, look, it should be the same width as the actual collecting pen itself. So look, if the collecting pen is say 3 meters wide, the gate in should be 3 meters wide. It just avoids having corners where sheep can go in and try and hide and that sort of thing,
Yeah, you maintain and flow. Look, I suppose it's not always going to be ideal, but you might need step down pens if it is a bigger area. Look, speaking about moving sheep, I suppose if we bring it on from the collecting pen, our forcing pen is next. Now, look, there are a number of options there. Maybe you'll outline what they are.
Yeah, look, there's 3 main options there. One is putting in a funnel-shaped forcing pen, and a funnel-shaped forcing pen is exactly what it says on the tin there. Look, it's using 2 gates feeding into the race. Those gates, at a 30-degree angle. Look, the advantage of that system, easy to build, cheap to build, easy enough to operate. But that angle of 30 degrees is important. You don't want you don't want a bigger angle than that for good flow, from the forcing pen into the race. The other option there is a circular forcing pen. Look, I suppose the downside to those is they tend to be more expensive than the other options. Look, the upside to them is you have good control over the sheep. In those, you'll have 2 backing gates. I suppose another advantage of them with the 2 backing gates inside the forcing pen, you can use that forcing pen, you can use those gates to always, tighten up the sheep, even if you wanted to maybe handle sheep inside in the forcing pen rather than running them down through the race. But, and then the third option there is a semicircular forcing pen. Again, look, the advantage of that option, it's relatively cheap to build compared to a circular forcing pen. And look, it works very well if your collecting pen feeds directly into that semicircular forcing pen. You've got a gentle angle there that'll bring you then around into the race. And what I would find is if it's designed properly, sheep will, they'll flow seamlessly from the from the collecting pen into that forcing pen if it's well designed.
And obviously that forcing pen, Edward, it should hold at least the number of sheep you want in the race and possibly more.
Look, it should. And if you take a standard race there is, say, 6.1 meters and 500 mils wide, it'll hold 8 unshorn ewes. Look, what you want is a forcing pen there that'll hold, I would say, 4 or 5 times that number is what you're looking for,
It's the simple things at a time to refill these things is where your day's work comes in. Look, if we talk about the races, double races, single races, maybe just take me through the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, look, to me, a single race is a drafting race. So, look, a drafting race is look, those races, they tend to be 500 mils wide. The advantage of those is the sheep come down them in single file. When it comes to drafting, it's very easy to draft them, obviously, when they're coming down single file. Look, straightforward enough to build the drafting race. When you're operating the drafting race, look, the handler is going to be standing outside the race when it comes to dosing or vaccinating or whatever he's doing with the sheep in the race. So the important thing there about the drafting race is the sides of that race. It shouldn't be any more than 850 mils high. Otherwise, it's not possible to stand outside, reach in, and reach in. And you might have a ewe there, and she has her head close to the ground. You want to be able to reach in and put your hand on her chin and just lift her head up. But that's why the 850 mils is important. I suppose some people, it's down to personal preferences. My personal preference is that, you would have a standalone drafting race, 500 mils wide. Some people like to put in a dosing race. And I suppose the reason some people like to put in a dosing race is that, look, it'll hold a lot more sheep. So it needs to be refilled less often. So your dosing race, if one person operating on their own, the dosing race, it shouldn't be any more than maybe 750, 800 mils wide. That allows one person operating inside in that dosing race to dose your lamb or handle your yoke, and then to turn them back behind them, but still be able to keep those sheep in front of them. If you go any wider than that with a dosing race, sheep can escape past the handler.
So a lot of that comes down to preference. I suppose the layout of them, Edward, some will be side by side, some will have the double first leading into the single. Again, I suppose that depends on the yard and the preference of the operator.
Look, it does. If you have a drafting race and a dosing race side by side, what you can do is you can limit the drafting, where you can draft from in the drafting race. So it might limit you to drafting towards the end of a drafting race. Whereas if the drafting race is standing on its own, it is possible to design it so that you can draft, say, 3 ways, left and right, and leave the head gate or leave the front gate open. You might not have that option there when you put in a dosing race beside it. Look, I suppose the advantage of having the dosing race and the drafting race together is you have 3 walls, whereas if you have them separately, you'll end up with possibly 4 walls. Look, my preference there for a drafting race and a dosing race and the one handling unit is the drafting race stands on its own, and that the dosing race is possibly to one side. That would be my personal preference.
Look, a part of that comes down to cost, location, space, that kind of thing in it. Look, just on the drafting race, I suppose there's a couple of things we need to consider with it just to get it right. The flow out to the different pens, how many options we have for drafting, any tips around that?
Look, well, the first thing is the drafting race should be located centrally in the handling unit or slightly off centre, okay? So it should never be located against the wall. And what I mean by located against the wall is where you have a wall on one side, and then, you've got the side of the drafting race, because what that does, it limits drafting to the end of the race. And whereas if you have a standalone race, you've got options there to draft left and right. Well, you've got at least 3 options there, left and right, and then through the head of the drafting race. They're the options that I'd be looking at.
And just like with the sorting gates themselves, so we saw them mid-panel, some at the end of the race. Just maybe what key things to consider with sorting gates?
Again, look, it's personal preference. My preference there is if you want to draft 3 ways, you've the exit gate out of the race, you can leave that open, and then you've got 2 drafting gates along the length of the race. And look, those drafting gates along the length of the race, a couple of key features there. One is they shouldn't be within 5 meters of the entrance of the race. It just gives the sheep enough time to come in and build up momentum to go down the race. Just avoid stalling. The second thing about those gates along the side of the race, they should be about 1.2 meters long. It just means that the sheep has enough, she's coming at an angle, she has enough space then to exit, without catching the side of the race. The other thing about those gates is they should be, the gates on the side of the race we're talking about now, they should be solid non-see-through gates, because when you're not using them, what you don't want is that sheep, if sheep could see through them, they could stall, and you want to avoid that.
Okay, so look, this time of year, the other big task that's been done aside from dosing is weighing. The options for weighing in race, having an area set up outside of it. It's another laboursome task that we can potentially leave easier. Any key tips around that?
Look, I suppose, that should be thought of at the beginning, early on. And, a couple of options there. One option is to put the weigh scales inside in the race. So it's to leave 2 panels there that can be taken out, and the weigh scales can be put into the race. Some people prefer not to have the weigh scales in the race. They might prefer to have it on the forcing pen, or they might prefer to have it between the entrance to the race and the forcing pen gate. The idea there is if you can get your sheep into the forcing pen, and then rather than having to, particularly lambs, rather than trying to get them down through the race, if you have a gate off the forcing pen where you can drop in your weigh scales, and then you can put your lambs straight from the forcing pen into the weigh scales, it just can reduce the amount of labour that's involved, the amount of handling involved.
Look, when we're talking about weighing, we're talking about drafting. Another important consideration there is the ability to be able to recycle sheep. So often if we're sorting through a batch, we might want to go through the subset of them again. That is another feature that needs to be considered.
Look, it is. And look, at the design stage, before any building work is done, you should always look at a handling unit and say, right, okay, if I want to take sheep through the handling unit a second time, so if I want to recycle them through the handling unit without them leaving the handling unit, where should I be putting in gates there to allow that to happen? And it just, in the future then, when you're using that unit, it just gives you a lot more options and it makes life easier. So, and again, look, I mean, you'll be talking about maybe a 10-foot gate or something like that. That's what you're looking at there,
Look, I suppose we focused a lot on the race. I suppose there's a couple of other things we need to consider in this handling unit. A footbath you mentioned earlier would be one of them. The site in that footbath, Edward, size, but what do we need to consider there?
Look, I suppose the important thing is to consider there is where you're going to put the footbath. Look, the options there is that you would put the footbath possibly inside in the race. So it could be inside in a drafting race. The other option is that's a standalone footbath. My preference there would be a standalone footbath. The reason for that is a couple of reasons. One is it just means that, if you have a fixed footbath inside in a drafting race, even when you're not using it for footbathing, it's going to accumulate, dirty water from sheep passing down through it. And it can be just hard to keep lambs or hard to keep feet clean. And you just want to avoid that. The other thing about a standalone footbath is that, if you have a standalone footbath and you put sheep in there for footbathing, you can still carry on and use your race for, doing other activities, drafting, dosing or whatever. The other thing about the standalone footbath is, one of the key things with footbathing is you want to let sheep stand 5 or 10 minutes in a footbath solution so that it soaks in. That batch footbath gives you that option, okay, of leaving them standing there for longer. Look, when it comes to the actual design of that footbath, a couple of things I'd be looking at. The location is important, obviously. Look, we said earlier, about avoiding pollution. To me, the ideal footbath, it's rectangular in shape, right? So it's longer than it is wide. Just makes it easier to get sheep into it. Sheep want to stay as far away from you as they can, so they'll tend to go to the end of a longer race like that. It's just easier to fill it. The width of that batch footbath, what I'd be saying is, look, somewhere between 1.5 and 3 meters wide is ideal. And the reason for that is, look, if you have a wide footbath, if you have a footbath that is one sheep wide, and the first sheep decides that she doesn't want to go in or she decides to stall, she holds up the whole show. Whereas if it's 1.5 to 3 meters wide, what that means there is that, if that sheep does stall, other sheep can still go around and draw the rest of the sheep into the footbath.
I suppose, Edward, we also have to consider the practicalities of actually filling that footbath with water and emptying it again afterwards.
Look, yes, and I suppose a couple of things there. One is that, there should be a tap nearby for filling it, okay? In some cases, what I see is a farmer will, make sure you've access there for a tractor, because, it might, for bringing in water or also for cleaning it out. The other thing that you could do or should do maybe with a footbath, like with a batch footbath like that, to make it easier to clean it out, there should be a bung in it that can be taken out, and then the water is the dirty water, the used material then goes into a tank, then into a slatted tank or something like that.
One other feature, maybe we don't see them in yards as much anymore, but certainly was an important feature previously and probably should be considered, is a dip tub or a dip tank. What are the couple of key features we need to consider for thinking about putting one of those in?
Look, the key features there about the dip tub, to me, number one there is it should be sited in such a way to prevent pollution. That's very important. And that means, digging a trial hole, see where the water table is. If there's a high water table in that area, then that area is not suitable for a dip tub. That's number one. The other thing is avoid areas that are likely to flood. Look, what you don't want is water obviously flowing into a dip tub. The other thing is, look, when you're putting in a dip tub, you're better to buy either a precast dip tub or one of the plastic dip tubs that come as one complete unit, rather than someone's trying to build their own tub. The other thing you need to consider then is how you're going to get the sheep into that dip tub. And look, a couple of options there. One is, I suppose you'd call it a side entry from the race. That tends to be popular there with the larger flocks. So it's having a slide or an exit from the race into the dip tub. Look, again, popular with the larger flocks, less labour intensive. You could have a decoy sheep ahead of the slide. The idea being that you would draw the sheep in, they'd step onto the slide and then into the dip tub. The other option there, that smaller flocks, so flocks maybe of 100 joules or less, or flocks that don't dip on a regular basis might use, would be to have a dip tub beside the forcing pen. But look, it's labour intensive. The sheep has to be caught and lifted into the dip tub. And it's look, the downside to that, obviously, labour intensive. You really need two people to operate that system. And the other downside of that system is the handler, when you're dropping sheep into a dip tub like that, the handler is more likely to get splashed with dip. I suppose the other issue then is the size of tub that you're looking at. So for flocks of 100 to 250 ewes, I'd say you'd want somewhere between 1,050 litres to maybe 1,250 litre dip tub. And then flocks 200 ewes plus, I would say you'd want a dip tub that's 1,800 litres plus for them. Look, the other key issue I think with dip tubs is there should be a proper cover on them. So when the dip tub is not in use, that either animals or people, particularly children, cannot get access to that dip tub. And that cover, look, it should be level with the floor around it. It should be a steel cover. I see people using wood, and the problem with wood is, look, if it's wet, it's going to rot, and it's going to be slippy as well. And, when wood gets wet, it expands and it shrinks and it gets dry. So it doesn't fit properly, whereas if you have a proper steel cover on it, it will fit. But that steel cover, it needs to be childproof, so that, obviously, unsupervised children cannot get access to it.
No, safety is essential, especially with a dip tub. Look, we might go back to some of the very basic things at the moment. In terms of making life easier for the handler in that unit, what are the couple of other little design features you'd have seen over the years that just were nice adaptations to different aspects that just made the working with sheep in it easier?
A couple of things there. Number one, I would say using pulleys and weights. So, there's a lot of gates there. If you use a pulley, you can avoid having to walk to those gates, particularly around the draining pens there when you're dipping sheep. If you have a pulley system there, you don't have to, you know yourself, sheep when they're dipped, they're going to shake the dip off themselves. And if you can avoid, the way of avoiding having to pass those sheep is have a pulley system there for opening and closing gates. The other thing then is, look, obviously gates are heavy when you're using a pulley, and if you use a counterweight, those counterweights can then take some of the pressure or some of the weight of those gates when you're trying to lift them or when you're trying to drop them down. Just makes life a little bit easier for the handler. The other thing about those weights there, if you're using counterweights, it's very important that they're enclosed in such a way that they don't come into contact with the handler and they don't come into contact with sheep either. The other thing that's useful to have, if you have a dosing line over the race or over the area that you're dosing, dosing lines are very handy. You can attach your dosing pack to that, and rather than having to put on the dosing pack yourself on your back, you can leave it on the line. It just means that you're freed up to move more freely. But the other thing is, when you're refilling a race, to dose the next batch of sheep, if you don't have that pack on you, your movement is freer. But the other thing that's less likely to happen is you're not going to get pipes snagged on gates and things like that. The other thing that's important with the dosing line is if you just put in a ring there, that'll hold the dosing gun as well, and just means that the dosing gun is not hanging down over the sheep, and they can't catch it or anything like that. The other thing that's important there is just, I call them a handler gate. And a handler gate to me is just a small gate, maybe 0.5 or 0.6 of a metre wide, in the handling unit, to allow the handler to move freely through the unit without having to open gates, without having to open bigger gates or without having to climb over walls. So what I would do in a case like that, I'd look at the handling unit and I'd say to myself, if I'm handling sheep in that unit, how am I going to get from one area to another area without having to climb over a wall? And they're the places I would put in that handler gate. So, I suppose, look, a couple of examples there would be where the forcing pen meets the race. If there's a handler gate to the left and to the right there, it just means when you have filled that forcing pen with sheep, you can get from that forcing pen down each side of the race through a handler gate without having to climb over any gates. And the same then, when you're operating the drafting gate, are there other areas of the handling unit that you want to go into? Maybe you want to go back into the collecting pen to bring in more sheep into the forcing pen. There should be handler gates there to avoid you having to climb over gates. The other thing it's going to do, it's the odd time you're going to have to take out one sheep or one lamb, and it just means that open a small gate, push the sheep out. There's no lifting over gates.
No, I think it's an important feature. Like we talked about sheep flow, we have to remember that the operators have to move through the unit as well. So no, it's an important point. Look, some of the basics again are avoiding sharp edges, easy to latch gates. Try to avoid banging maybe as well to try and keep it that it's more user friendly from that point of view.
Look, yes, and I suppose, look, where metal is meeting metal. So if you've, say, a drafting gate, banging against another, a steel surface against the race, look, if you put in a strip of plastic or rubber in a place like that, it takes the noise out of it, it takes the vibration out of it. The other places there, look, if you have say a handle on those drafting gates, if you cover a metal handle, some plastic piping, it just takes the vibration out of it for yourself. And the other thing is, on those cold days that you're drafting sheep, if you can avoid having to put your hand in metal, you're not going to be suffering from the cold as much. I suppose the other things that you could look at as well, and things that do make handling sheep easier for the handler, for example, on your forcing pen, could you put a gate on the forcing pen where you can back up a trailer to that? And then if you want to take lambs out of the forcing pen, put them into a trailer, things like that are going to make life easier. I suppose the other thing there would be something like your drafting race. If you have, a half-meter concrete area on the surface where the handler is walking, it just means that you've got an even surface there that you're walking on all the time. There's less likely to be trips and falls and things like that.
Look, Edward, you've gone through quite a number of different aspects, and I'll put a link up in the show notes to the booklet because there's a world of information in it. If we go back to the very start of this, it's something that makes our labour input a lot easier. It can improve the productivity of our flock. It is one of the bigger investments on sheep farms, but if we put it in the context of the repayment we get in terms of labour saving, in terms of better productivity, it more than pays itself back.
Look, it absolutely does. And look, for me, I would say, look, you take a long-term view of being in sheep, and putting in a handling facility is a long-term investment that's worth making, because, it may look like a big investment at the beginning, but over time, it is great value for money. Like, I would think the most important thing there is to think about it and to go out and have a look at other sheep handling units and talk to other farmers and see what they're doing, because farmers, that have worked at this for years, they've a lot of good ideas out there, they've a lot of experience, and you can just build on that.
There's always things you can tweak and improve. Look, I really appreciate your time on that day. Edward, it was great getting you on. Thank you.
Kieran, thank you.
We leave it there for this week's episode. I have included a link in the description to Edward's booklet he referred to at the beginning, A Guide to Designing a Sheep Handling Unit. It's an excellent reference to go back on, cover many aspects of sheep handling unit design. That's it for me. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.